What's up guys, I'm ImSidVicious and today we're doing the final update on my Ice Spear Freezing Pulse Totem Polytheist build in Legacy of Phrecia. I'm going to give you the final verdict, talk about the Polytheist versus the Hierophant, show what we accomplished, and then I'll walk through the final PoE so you can copy the finished version. Now overall, the build performed really well through the event. The only time it felt rough was the mid progression when we started pushing higher tier maps, rare corrupted maps, and we were trying to do our Atlas progression, and we were stacking the gauntlet effects and the extra mods and the enraged, and that part felt pretty squishy, especially if you played early on and this was like pre-nerf, so we experienced the full pain of it all. But once we got through the hump and upgraded a few key items, we started clearing basically everything we wanted to do. Now, the biggest question I had going into the event, and the question people were asking was, is Polytheist worth it? What do you think about the Hierophant in the base game? And the honest answer is Hierophant is much stronger, which is honestly good news for us when 3.28 comes around, and like no debate, Hierophant, all the points in the Ascendancy basically give a direct damage power spike. The main one is the Arcane Surge utility that we get, and our totems produce Arcane Surge, plus on top of that more spell damage. And then also we have minimum charges that synergize with our Anathemas for the +4 curse setup, +1 totem, more damage per totem scaling. And then we have Polytheist, which is just different. It gives us more quality of life where we get free curse immunity. We get a bunch of quality of life through Burning Ground, Shock, and Chill Ground immunity. We also get some damage with minimum frenzy charges and also some additional projectiles, which is nice. Mainly for mapping, this feels really great because you don't have to think about those ground effects nearly as much. And to be fair, in base PoE, the biggest one usually is Burning Ground, especially with Exarch influence or some of the random map mods. So it's not like this build turns into an absolute beast, but it does remove a lot of the friction of mapping with a bunch of these ground degen immunities. The one thing that Polytheist does actually have a huge effect, which took me a little bit to figure out, was the Reflect immunity. Now, I don't know how it is coded in this event, but with Polytheist, my totems were effectively Reflect immune. This is not how the base game works. Normally, you cannot solve Reflect on totems at all. So in this event, it basically meant I could run almost every map mod without really thinking about it. Now, once you get into the block version and start pushing harder content, the main mod you still don't want is reduced block chance. Same for certain T17 setups. So TLDR, Hierophant, more powerful, more damage. Polytheist is more smoother for mapping, has a fewer problems, and then the no reflect really feels amazing. In terms of what we accomplished, we basically finished everything I wanted to. We hit 115 out of 115 Atlas completion, and again, this was pre-nerf. We got every favorite map slot. A lot of that was done live on stream with viewers, bringing people in, doing carries, just having fun with it. We did all the major bosses. The only real scuffed moment were streamer moments while I was doing the carries, where I had to type or invite someone in, stand still, and just taking a random hit, that kind of thing. But overall, the build did exactly what I wanted to. We also did T17s. Fortress is obviously the easiest, but we tested other ones too, and we got through them. There are still moments where you can die. Basically, I didn't fully transition into the full Savalan block and wand setup. That version is where you're hitting 90-90 block and you basically don't die until something slips through the block. I stayed with the Annihilating Light setup because it was simple and it deleted all the content that I was doing. Alright, so here's the final PoB. We're sitting at 22 million DPS on the baseline setup, and that's more than enough to do everything in the event. Defensively, we have 80% spell block and 48% attack block. That's extremely solid for mapping, and it's one of the reasons we were able to do things like 4 Deli Orbs on harder maps, like Conquer maps with Maven Witness. And gear-wise, the core items, we still have the Annihilating Light, which is very cheap now. We have the +2 Soul Mantle with increased damage. Mine was like 2 Divines when I bought it. It is rare of a double corrupt, and it's still not best in slot, but it's better than the +2 by itself. So it's a little bit of increased damage that we got. Most of my gear was pretty affordable. I would say most of my build sums up to around 15 Divines. But let's talk about some of the expensive items that I upgraded. One of the real expensive one was Rain of Splinters this event, because there's so many Totem and Ballista builds. The price was higher than usual. I paid around 15 to 18 Divines for mine, which was a perfect roll, something you don't really need to aim for. I also grabbed a Watcher's Eye with Penetration. Mine was fairly cheap, it was like 70 or 80 chaos. If you want penetration plus cast speed, it was way more expensive, and I didn't go for that because I felt like it was a small upgrade and I could spend the Divine somewhere else. I also used Forbidden Flame and Flesh Jewels. I talked about doing something where I would get +1 totem from the Hierophant Ascendancy, but I ended up choosing Arcane Blessing, which gave me relatively similar damage. And also Arcane Blessing is great because it gives you strong, more spell damage, and it also solves Arcane Surge without having to set up a Cluster Jewel or use Arcane Surge on your Flame Dash. Now the biggest upgrade was Awakened GMP. I got a level 6 Awakened GMP for 20 Divines, which was insanely cheap, and if you look at it right now, Awakened GMP sits around like 35 divs, so it's a very expensive upgrade, but it definitely does bring a lot of damage. One thing I want to point out with this PoB number is it's not inflated at all. I'm not doing any weird config tricks. I don't even have Flask toggled on here for the baseline. So when you do turn on Flask, the build jumps a lot in DPS. Bottle Fate and Dying Sun are also 2 fairly big upgrades. I spent around maybe 3 or 4 Divines for the Dying Sun, and then I spent maybe like 10 Divines for the Bottle Fate. These add a absolute ton of damage. When you pop these 2 together, you absolutely melt bosses, and that's why I run the increased Flask effect. You have 4 seconds of just insane DPS, and it's enough to delete pretty much all the bosses. Also, small note for anyone who's following the PoB, the returning projectile isn't fully represented in the PoB DPS number. Mechanically, the projectile goes out and then it returns. And on the return, it actually hits everything. It's less damage on the return, but it's a big chunk of our damage. So currently, it's 65% less damage on the return. So to accurately calculate our damage in PoB, those projectiles are still hitting, right? And it would basically mean they're adding 35% more damage. And this would be calculated as the return projectile damage. So the real in-game feels DPS is actually higher than what you see on the baseline display. And we could also add it to our PoB to show what it actually looks like when you have 35% more damage. You can see it in the gameplay, everything just melts. Also, returning projectiles is much stronger in destructive play and Maven invitations, or any case where there are multiple bosses, because the return projectile will pierce everything and hit multiple targets. Also, a small upgrade you can do is for your rings, you can get a corrupted anathemas. There are a bunch of good corruptions like bleed immunity, poison immunity, and if you want more damage, you can get Zealotry increased effect. I also want to mention the impossible escape. I'm basically using an impossible escape to reach 48% attack block breakpoint more efficiently. If the impossible escape is too expensive, no problem. You can just spend 2 extra passive points and just route there normally. It's completely optional. And if you want to push the block even higher, you can use tattoos or strength nodes, which each give 1% block, so you can take that into the 50s if you really want. I didn't go full max everything this event. I stayed a little balanced and went for a more defensive option because the gauntlet mods were very annoying and they did make things harder. Also, if you wanted to, you could also get a megalomaniac and try to get more block that way with some damage nodes. Something to kind of consider. For leveling in XP, I used Blight to hit level 96. My idle setup was pretty simple. I stacked more Blight monsters as much as possible. Then I added a couple faster Blight monsters so that they spawn quicker. This will create lag, so you can drop this if you don't want to do this. I also guaranteed Blight on the map. Use 5 of the small idols to also reduce the cost of the towers, which then just made the towers cost basically nothing. And then I also ran Blightheart Scarab, just more monsters. From 95 to 96, I was getting around 5 to 6% XP per map, and it was super safe. Between our block and solid chaos res, it felt pretty consistent. If you want more chaos res, you can get tattoos on your int nodes. I felt like I was safe at 57 chaos res and I wasn't dying to chaos damage as much, but if you do want to hit that 75%, you can use up your int nodes because we don't need that much int with some tattoos. In terms of currency, the strategy that fits really well with the build is one that I do pretty much every league, and it's the Maven invitation rotation. What you do is you just take as much % chance as possible to drop Shaper and Elder maps on the final boss kill. Then you can just bounce between them based on how much you have for sustain. Once you hit around 25% chance on your idols, you can basically perma sustain Shaper maps. And let's say if you run both Shaper and Elder at 25% each on your idols, you can bounce indefinitely and actually over sustain your maps, and you can just sell them. These profits are very layered and they pretty much always guarantee you money. Run the invitation, sell the Maven risks, or run Maven yourself. Sometimes when you're doing the Maven invitations, you get Orb of Conflicts, you get Maven Chisels. Those are very expensive as the league goes on. You can also just get a bunch of Shaper fragments for doing each of the Shaper Guardians, and then you can choose to run the Shaper fragments yourself or sell them. The Shaper maps, they have some unique drops like Dying Sun, Shaper Orb, and then the Uber fragments are guaranteed drop. You always make money. Same thing with the Elder fragments that always drop. You don't make as big of a profit margin on the Elder fragments, but you also have a chance to drop a Watcher's Eye. You sell these unidentified and they will net you a decent profit. And like I said, if you don't want to run any of the bosses, you can just sell the fragments and still profit. It's basically hard to lose money once you have this set up, and our build very much excels in the strat, and this strat always makes money at pretty much every point in the league, including the base game as well. Also, in terms of idols, I experimented a lot. I think I probably spent like 50-60 divines on just testing different idol strategies. One strat that I'm currently doing is the 4 Deli Orbs on Conqueror rotations, and I use Harbinger Orbs to juice the Conqueror maps to T16. Right now, I'm sitting around 400 daily progress, consistently hitting like 20 rewards, and the build has no problem doing it. Sometimes Omni just one-shots us whenever he shows up, and I haven't really figured out why, but other than that, it's pretty solid. The cost of entry was around 60 chaos per map, but it drops raw divines frequently. Like almost every other map, you pretty much get one divine, plus all the bubblegum currency on top of that, so you get a bunch of chaos, a bunch of fusing, chromatics, all that good stuff, sometimes exiles. So the maps take longer, like around 7 to 10 minutes depending on the layout, and you know, just try to get like good layouts by either using like horizon orbs or just do them on shaper maps instead if you want more consistency in your layout. Also, you could just do scarab deli orbs. I haven't really looked too much into the scarab market, but then this would involve you sort of using all your portals, kind of collecting all the scarabs and whatnot. Overall, like the Phrecia event has been really fun. The build was great, it performed well. It had a couple rough spots mid-game, but mostly because of the gauntlet mods and the enrage monsters, enrage map bosses primarily, which made everything feel a little squishier until our gear caught up. If you want the most up-to-date on my builds, the best place is always my VODs. At the start of basically every stream, I do a quick build update and what I did that day, what I'm doing, what I'm gonna upgrade next, where the build is going. The final POB will be linked below, along with anything you need for the setup. If you have any questions, stop by the stream. I'm still streaming on YouTube and Twitch, and I'll help you out on stream. You know, if you have any questions, if you want me to look at your build, you know, I've done a few build reviews, just looking at people's POB, kind of guide them. I want you guys to have the best experience playing the build, so you guys can have a better time just playing the event, etc. So I hope you guys enjoyed the build. I hope you guys enjoyed the video, and I'm ImSidVicious, and I'll see you later. Peace.